Hello everybody, welcome back to the show. We are continuing our series that we've been doing with my friends at DLD, who are celebrating in January of next year, January 2025, their 20th year anniversary of the DLD show. Today we are speaking with David Kirkpatrick, a frequent guest at DLD, and as always in this series, I began by asking David Kirkpatrick what he remembers about January 2005.
Well, in January of 2005, I was a writer at Fortune magazine. I was also overseeing and developing an annual conference called Brainstorm, which happened at the end of the summer, so I wasn't in January working on it too hard. But my work was understanding technology, writing about the big technology companies. And that moment in 2005 was extremely important because after the dot-com crash, an entirely new industry was emerging, which was extremely exciting and has really been changing the world to this day.
David, in contrast with a lot of the people we've interviewed for this series, your life has zigged and zagged dramatically over the last 20 years. If you'd have known the narrative of what's happened to you and where you're at in late 2024 in 2005, what do you think you would have thought?
I would have been proud of myself, I think, because what I really did in the subsequent decades, and I will say I think DLD was a major factor in my thinking about it because it's always been such a synthetic, big picture event, and I've been part of it for so long, is to really work on integrating my understanding of the dynamics of technology into a deeper and broader understanding of the dynamics of societal change. And pretty much all the major things I've done in the last 20 years, roughly, have been aiming to understand that nexus better. Not just tech per se, but the impact of tech, the sort of zeitgeist, the societal zeitgeist as influenced by tech, and that has been more and more influenced all that time. So it's been an extraordinarily gratifying and exciting and, sometimes confusing and daunting project.
You mentioned DLD, David. This series is actually being produced in association with our friends at DLD. I think you have the record. You weren't at DLD 1, but you've been at every one since. You've been to many other conferences. What is it about DLD that makes it special in your mind?
Well, DLD is special for me exactly because Steffi and all of her colleagues there have always sought to try to put tech in the bigger context. And not just, it's really always been a conference centered on tech, but it never disregarded science, politics, the environment, the arts in particular. I've always found that really interesting, the degree to which the arts are deeply integrated into the DLD program. So, I'd say going there time and time again has not only helped me meet people involved in such an incredible array of activities, many of them tech, but not all of them tech, but it's just helped me stay focused really on this big interest of mine, which is, I think, parallel in some ways to Steffi's, which is why I also developed conferences that were not dissimilar. Understanding the world through the lens of understanding tech, maybe, is how it might be said.
One of the things that you've done over the last 20 years, David, is produce Techonomy. It was a series of annual events, as well as an excellent publication. Its focus, more than anything else, though, seemed to be on the environment and the relationship between the environment and technology.
I wouldn't say that, by the way. I don't think.
How would you describe Techonomy? What was the original point of
The original aim of Techonomy was to make the point, particularly to business leaders, that every company was a tech company, that technology and the economy were becoming increasingly integrated, and you couldn't understand one without the other, which, interestingly, I think business leaders, which was our initial target market, so to speak, have really all fully understood by now. But that revelation, that understanding is still sinking in on other kinds of leaders, particularly in government, particularly in the United States. Although I think that has progressed in odd and interesting ways too. But techonomy was about the integration of technology in the economy. Now, environment became a more and more important element of understanding what was happening in the economy during that time. But it was really just about business and society and technology all glommed together and tried to have a big picture discussion about what that aggregation of forces was doing.
And of course, culture, DLD and Techonomy are probably my two favorite conferences. You and I have spent a lot of time at both together.
Thank you.
I remember at Techonomy one year, you had Lyle Lovett.
Right.
You used to have remarkable musical artists.
Yes, thank you.
To have the opportunity to
We had Richard Thompson one year.
You had Richard Thompson, you had Lyle Lovett. It's always the live experience, and that's certainly true of DLD. You never quite know who you're going to meet yet. The spirit of DLD is as much Yossi as Steffi, and of course Yossi never attends any formal sessions. He just sits at he stands in the corridors and talks to people.
Yeah.
Are conferences really kind of in a way the antithesis of digital? They're all about the physical, they're all about people talking, meeting, all about unexpected consequences of bumping into people.
Oh, that's very well said. I think that's a big part of it. I think conferences have proven to be more and more necessary for people who are suffering from information overload on a day-to-day basis and find it enormously beneficial to, in a sense, retreat into a collective thinking process, which I think both DLD and Techonomy at their best represent. And a lot of other events have done that really well too. The interesting thing about DLD and Techonomy, as opposed to many other events that happen, is they are in a sense less focused. They are more trying to encompass literally everything that's going on, if possible. Again, with the foundation of tech, which gives it a focus. But you know, an awful lot of other events are industry specific, activity specific. Even other tech conferences put on by media companies, I think, are, you know, not aiming so explicitly to leave the people's, to allow people to leave having really gained a fundamental insight about their entire societal kind of presence and the presence of their organization, how those things all fit together. So, yeah, you know, I think information overload that we feel more and more, even now than ever, is one of the main reasons why conferences have thrived in these last decades and will continue to.
As I said, my most memorable moment, certainly at Techonomy, was the Lyle Lovett concert. Do you have some particularly cherished memories, either at Techonomy or at DLD, moments that really captured their spirit that you've never forgotten?
Well, there's, of course, many. I mean, at Techonomy, the most famous event, the most famous moment was the Zuckerberg moment in 2016, 2 days after the first election of Donald Trump, when I was interviewing him on stage, and that was a huge project to get him to agree to a uninhibited interview in public, which he very seldom does, and then or now, especially when he doesn't have any expectation of what the questions are going to be. But after much arrangement, and because I'd written a book about Facebook, I was able to get him to appear. And then he put his foot in his mouth and said it's a crazy idea that fake news on Facebook affected the election of Donald Trump, which proved to be a fundamentally false statement that even in retrospect it turned out he knew was false. So he was effectively lying, but even before people knew he was lying, that quote became one of the quotes of the year and was hugely beneficial to all of us at Techonomy. So that's obviously hugely memorable.
Did you know he was lying when he said it immediately?
I suspect I did not know he was lying. No, a lot of that did not come out till later. the role of Russia buying ads in rubles and placing ads in Wisconsin and Michigan. Those things didn't come out until much later. There was a lot of talk about disinformation, misinformation, political interference, but it was still nascent. And there were congressional hearings after that. I mean, an amazing book was written by two writers from the New York Times called The Ugly Truth, and detailed.
Who's been on the show?
Yes, those two great reporters detailed in shocking examples how completely compromised Facebook really was during that election and later too. I mean, I don't think that problem has been solved to this day. So that's one moment. You want me to tell you other moments?
Well, that's a great one from Techonomy. What about DLD? Is there a moment?
Well, I remember for myself, I'll tell you one. There's been a lot of really memorable moments. Okay, there's two that jump out at me. I've been privileged at DLD sometimes to do some panels that were really quite prominent. And one that I did, and I don't remember the year, but it was probably in the vicinity of 2009 or 10-ish. Paul Callan, who was the CEO of Berta, and what was his name? The lawyer for Google, forgetting his name, and one or two other panelists. But the discussion was really about the role of Google in media. And on that panel, Callan, that I was moderating, Callan had come prepared with a lot of data about how he felt
was the lawyer
Google was
Walker?
really
misrepresented. Was it Kent Walker?
No, it was
David Drummond.
David Drummond, thank you.
Who
David
recursed Walker.
Yeah, it was Drummond. And
he was is quite a slick character, very good.
He's very smart, and I knew him moderately well at that time, and he, I had nothing against him, but Berta was really mad about the way that, money was flowing, and the way attention was flowing because of the role of Google that he thought was very unfair to Berta's business, and he basically came with chapter and verse, unbeknownst to me, and essentially got into a real argument with Drummond on stage and essentially attacked Google. I know you have a Google connection, so I'm not trying to embarrass you, but that was just a fact at the time. And another time, which I like panels that really have some drama. Another one was when what's that? I have so much trouble remembering the names of companies, but that company what was the company that had they gave vouchers to people to get discounts at restaurants. Groupon, thank you. The Groupon CEO and I were on stage, and that was a kind of a little bit of a flim-flam company at the time.
To put it politely, David.
And it had a very questionable investor base. This one guy in particular that was a lot of questions were being raised about, and the controversy about Groupon was really sort of in its early stages, but I had this great interview with the CEO and was able to really ask him some tough questions that really he wasn't really able to answer.
I hope you embarrassed him,
That was
David.
fun.
I'm interested in going back to the Callan Drummond panel. I think I remember it.
Another one was when I interviewed Zuckerberg at DLD. But anyway, that's another one.
Well, yeah.
That was early.
And I want to come back to Zuckerberg and Facebook and the relationship on that front in a few minutes. But going back to Google and Callan, who was the CEO of Berta then, was a friend of both of ours. Berta invested massively in their own search engine. I don't think it was a great success. But given what's happened to Google, certainly this year and the antitrust stuff, do you think what Berta and Callan were so concerned about, has that been brought out? Is it more convincing in 2024 than perhaps it was in 2010?
Well, the issue at the time was a little more financial. mean, I think Google's role, and particularly at that time, was so overwhelming in forming the sort of dynamic structure of the internet that, in a sense, for all of Google's importance today, it's less important than it was then, because there's so many other companies whose power is close to comparable. I still think, Google search has a unique, overwhelmingly important role in the way that ordinary people interact with information. But it's no longer the only one that you would say that about. So if you're asking if Google's, changed since then, or whether the concerns about it have shifted, they have shifted. I mean, now the government's trying to split off the Chrome browser.
I guess my question is, it seems as if the U.S. Justice Department now is in sync with somebody like Paul Cowell in their critique.
Well, like I said earlier, my work has often spent a lot of its energy on trying to help leaders understand the integration that technology has with whatever they do. And historically, government has been very slow, especially in the United States, to recognize how central the internet was to the modern economy. I think that has changed. So now everybody knows the internet is the dominant part of the modern economy, at least from a financial point of view. These are by far the world's most valuable companies, which in itself is what has allowed government, in a sense, to realize how important they were. If they hadn't all become so incredibly valuable trillion-dollar entities, they might still be behind the curve. But everybody's focus goes on wherever the most money is, and so people have figured out finally the internet is where it's at. And the FTC, the Department of Justice, obviously are extremely vigilant about trying to ensure that these internet companies are behaving fairly and safely for society. I still don't think they really know what to do in most instances. Is it a good idea to split off Chrome from Google? I don't think that's that important, frankly. So I think, maybe in some ways the opportunity was lost to impose regulations that really would be salient to the scope of the challenge that internet companies presented to government and society. And in a sense, as a result, the companies have run rampant and they do what they want, and they're doing it with enormous profit and success. So, if you want, that's my big view of that. And you know how critical I am of Meta, obviously.
Yeah, we're going to come to that in a second. One of my most memorable meetings at DLD was with Margaret Vestager, EU competition czarina, and actually I followed up and interviewed her for my book.
It's been a great thing that DLD has had these leaders of the EU.
It's remarkable, but
yeah.
DLD, of course, is always held annually in Munich. It's one of the few places that brings together very senior European and US tech people. It seems over the last 20 years, though, David, the gap between European innovation, European economic dynamism, and the US has grown further and further apart.
Right.
Is that true? I mean, you've been to DLD every year since the beginning. Have you noticed the way in which, not through DLD, but in your experience of talking to European executives following European tech companies, that Europe is increasingly missing the dynamism of the United States?
Well, when it comes to internet companies, it does miss the dynamism of the United States. And I'd say in the economic realm generally. I mean, look, the U.S. economy has been performing dramatically better than Europe for some years. So you have to say, yes, Europe has missed something. But has Europe also seen something that we have forgotten in some respects? Yes, definitely. One of the great things about DLD has always been this bringing together of Americans and Europeans, like you said. But yeah, I mean, it's, if you want to know, in my opinion, I've been impressed time and time again at DLD with the intelligence, creativity of European entrepreneurs. And that is, I probably think more like a European than like an American in some respects. I'm very socially minded, maybe more than many American business leaders or even journalists. But the thing that's different, sadly, and Elon Musk is the ultimate example of this, is that American entrepreneurs are more willing to just put the pedal to the metal and do whatever needs to be done to make their businesses succeed. And I think very few European entrepreneurs have that degree of heedlessness and essentially willingness to break the rules and sometimes even the law in order to advantage themselves and their companies. And, I just saw the other day, in the last 50 years, not one single company has been created in Europe with over $100 billion market cap, whereas we have a whole raft of them over here. I guess maybe, it must be, Novo Nordisk must be an exception to that, but maybe it was, anyway, there are very few. Europe has not done what American companies have done, which is create world-spanning entities that take a brilliant idea, a very important technology platform idea, for example, and disseminate it globally, and create a profit machine that has incredible staying power and network effects, etc. So, Europe just hasn't figured that out, and I think it's again because they're too polite, sadly.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Well, and if they're not polite, like a Peter Thiel who grew up in Germany, then they come to the US. Musk, of course.
Musk is South African, right?
David, you've been at every DLD, apart from the original DLD in 20.
I know. I wish I'd been there. I could have said I'd been at every one.
You've always been a brilliant moderator. You're absolutely trusted by everyone. As you noted, you interviewed Mark Zuckerberg both at DLD and at Techonomy. He trusts you.
Oh, he used to. I don't know if he's still.
Well, he may not trust you more, but he trusts you as much as anyone. You are an example of a particularly trusted journalist. You don't have any agendas of your own. You're always very fair, perhaps sometimes a bit too polite, certainly compared
Thank
to
you.
myself. In this 20 years,
Compared
there's
to you,
been a crisis of trust of mainstream media. Many of the people you and I know very well are no longer working for the big publications. They're all, one way or the other, in crisis. As a guy who is intrinsically and intuitively trusted, happened to trust, particularly journalistic trust over the last 20 years, why don't people trust what they read anymore?
Well, actually, the answer to that question in some respects ties to the reason that I wrote a book about Facebook, and possibly my own misunderstanding of the impact of the reason I wrote a book about Facebook, which I started doing in 2008. And my insight was, Facebook created a broadcast platform for anyone. That was a historic breakthrough. But giving everyone a broadcast platform has essentially enabled everyone to have a multiplicity of choices for where they get their information, and has empowered those who have views that are not grounded in fact and trust to have weight in the social sphere, the information sphere, that is at this point now comparable to, or in some cases greater than, the established media. And so I think social media began a process, and Facebook in particular began a process, and so much of social media has followed in the wake of what Facebook did, of essentially enabling anyone with no constraints to say anything. And that has basically led to this rise of the creator economy, as we call it. And much of the creator economy are people who really don't know very much. They don't have to know anything. They only know how to be interesting. And if you're interesting, you can get an audience now, and that didn't used to be the case. You used to have, for the most part, have to be interesting because you said something that was meaningful and grounded in fact, and because you were in some sense trustworthy. I think that is no longer the case. I mean, if you look at the most recent, this obvious huge change we're in, the new presidential outcome, the role of podcasters really is being said to have been considerably greater than traditional media, the New York Times, etc., in terms of affecting the way people voted and the way people think. So Joe Rogan is more powerful than the New York Times in some fundamental way. That is a second or third order consequence of the rise of social media. So,
but why isn't Rogan? I mean, Rogan is in his own way trusted by
yes, he is.
his
I mean,
crowd.
that's a good point.
Is it because he's overtly biased? I mean, I always thought one of the dumbest things that the Harris campaign did was turn down the opportunity to go on Rogan because apparently, I don't know if it's true, but it doesn't speak very well of her campaign, that they were worried about offending some of the campaign staff.
Really? No, I didn't hear that.
Why is Rogan different? I mean, they've always been shock jocks. He's just a particularly smart, successful one.
Well, he's very smart. He's very successful. He's very good at sort of surfing the wave of public zeitgeist. And he's also very, very amazingly good at causing his readers to feel that he is like them and that he is a reflection of their sensibility. So in that sense, he is deeply trusted. And that is the reason why he has 6 or 7 million listeners, viewers, at a time sometimes. So, yeah, I'm not saying that there isn't trust. I mean, you're the one that brought the concept of trust into this conversation. I think professional journalism historically was essentially required to operate on a basis of trust. But modern media, the influencer economy, the creator economy, trust is not the central currency. The central currency is credibility, which is a little different, and likability and entertainability. And, because the world is seeking diversion from its cares, and I think a lot of the internet information and entertainment ecosystem is really a diversion machine. I mean, I don't think TikTok is a fundamentally trust-based platform. It's a diversion-based platform more. It's a entertainment-based platform. And, I don't think people really are so concerned about getting accurate information as they are about getting a sense of security that their worldview is valid. And they don't determine the validity of that worldview by a factual analysis.
One of the people I mentioned earlier clearly trusted you, maybe not so much anymore, is Mark Zuckerberg. You went on to write a very influential book, The Facebook Effect, about Facebook. You had unusual access to him and his senior executives. What year did you first meet him?
I met him in September of 2006.
So just after, or a year and a half after the first DLD. And I know it was an unusual meeting, wasn't it? You remember it very well.
Yeah, it was unusual. It was actually right at the height of what was called the newsfeed controversy. Facebook had less than 10 million users, and they had launched the newsfeed. Big whoop, right? But it was so disliked by the users that people were protesting in massive numbers. And I saw him at the height of that at a restaurant in Midtown for lunch. And what was so amazing was how calm he was. He had, I think, sent a letter to his users the night before.
This was the first time you met him?
The first time I met him, it was early September 2006. But the thing that was even more significant to me was he wasn't even thinking that hard about this controversy. He knew he had it in the bag. He thought that was going to be dealt with. And I was shocked by his degree of focus and confidence about the long-term vision for this company he was running, which at the time was really just for students of colleges for the most part, and high schools a little bit. And I said to him, "You seem like a natural CEO," but that offended him. So he said, "I don't want to be a CEO. I just want to do cool things," or something like that.
What was the card you had about the CEO?
He didn't ever give me that card, but around that time, he had a card that read, "I'm CEO, bitch." That's what it said. I think he only had that very briefly, but it did exist.
Another very prominent journalist, David, another guy you know very well, Stephen Levy, we had him in this series as well. in our conversation about Zuckerberg, he dramatically contrasted him with Jobs, who was hard to shut up, an extremely voluble person, always in the business of selling journalists. He noted that Zuckerberg was actually rather hard to talk to because he never said anything. Was that your experience?
Actually, no. I think he's become much more that way. I mean, Stephen wrote a book about Facebook much later than I did. His book is also excellent.
Not as good as yours is.
Well, that's for others to decide. But mine was the first, which is an honor, I suppose, or I don't know, maybe a blight. I don't know, because I was, I think, unduly positive in retrospect, but it came out in 2010. So what do you want? In 2010, I think Facebook's impact was still overwhelmingly positive. And it's still probably majority positive. It just has all these terrible things that the company has never chosen to fully remedy or doesn't even want to remedy. Zuckerberg is a very private person. I think Jobs, which Stephen knew Jobs better than I did, but I knew him moderately well also. And he was also very secretive, very manipulative. He talked constantly. He loved to interact with journalists because he was so confident in his ability to manipulate them. I think Zuckerberg is suspicious of journalists, and that's one reason he's tight-lipped around them, because he doesn't want to lose control of the narrative. I think Jobs was absolutely certain that he would never lose control of the narrative, and that he was incredibly good at that. I mean, look at somebody like Musk, also incredibly good at controlling the narrative. Trump, incredibly good at controlling the narrative. I mean, they're, in a way, the successors of Jobs in some fundamental way. In the scale of their influence, obviously, even greater. But, I mean, this Musk-Trump nexus now, one of the most amazing things to observe. And in fact, again, that it came out of tech. I mean, Musk is a tech person who has now turned into a de facto global leader. And it's so
it's a techonomy
disjunctive.
Narrative. It's what you predicted when you founded techonomy. Let's come back to Facebook, David. You noted that initially you were more positive. I always read the beginning of the Facebook effect as a book which was quite optimistic, particularly about the way in which social networks can change politics, encourage democracy. You were a believer at first. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. Yeah, I was a believer. I mean, the idea of the Facebook effect, the title, was intended to refer to the idea that even an individual, a single individual, could essentially unleash an idea or meme in this new information landscape of Facebook. And if it was the right meme for the right time, it could essentially take on an extraordinary life of its own and have massive sociocultural impact. And, I started the book with Oscar Morales, a young man in Colombia who began this 10 million person demonstration against the FARC guerrilla movement in the middle of the night by putting one message up on Facebook. And I used that as a metaphor for what Facebook could be. And I certainly believed at the time that Facebook would have an enormously positive impact on politics by giving ordinary people a voice. And I think in reality that has proven true. But other things have also proven true that I probably did not foresee as accurately as I should have, because malefactors, people with bad intent, also have proven incredibly effective at spreading their memes on these platforms, and particularly on that platform. And the platform has chosen not to really govern that with any kind of principle. And so, we've now got a world of contending factions, which is really what our society has become. And I think social media helped lay the groundwork for this us versus them world we live in.
Do you feel you were fooled by Facebook?
Maybe a little bit. But Facebook, it's not about Facebook, it's Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg has all power. I've talked to you about this before. Zuckerberg, uniquely for any company of the size of Facebook, which there's so few, but he still is unilaterally the king of Facebook. He is, as a documentary I played a role in said, the king of the metaverse, but he's also the king of Meta. Nobody can tell him anything that he doesn't want to do. He controls 50-some% of the voting shares. He can fire the board whenever he wants. So understanding Facebook has always been about understanding Zuckerberg. And I think I'm fortunate when I wrote my book that I was able to spend so much time with him. And the book, in a way, is a biography of his early life up to 2010. Did he fool me? I don't really think of it that way, because I don't think he knew what he really wanted, even as late as 2010. I think as he became one of the world's richest people, he's recently been the second richest person in the world after Musk on some days. I think the money became a whole different consideration and caused him to behave differently, and also forced him to retreat inside a personal kind of cocoon of protected security and allies that impaired his judgment, really. That's my opinion. I don't think when I knew him that he was secretly planning to do all these things that I now criticize him for. I think he's more iterative than that. I think he figured it out as he went along, and some of the things he figured out, I strongly disagree with.
By personalizing it, though, David, so much around Zuckerberg, aren't you over-personalizing the issue? After all, he had many people around him. Sheryl Sandberg brought the Google business model from Google to Facebook, was enormously influential in creating what Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. They were the two quintessential surveillance capitalist companies, Facebook and Google.
Still are.
So, could we argue, or could one argue that, I'm not excusing Zuckerberg, but whoever would have been in charge, any young kid who had the good fortune of founding a remarkable company in the first decade of the 21st century would have made similar mistakes.
It's possible that you're right, but that would only be if, and maybe it's almost a certainty that this would be the case, whoever ran it was predominantly focused on aggregating power and wealth rather than having a positive impact on society. And I think it's possible to do both. I think Facebook could have been an enormously successful, profitable, and powerful organization while having more of a social construct guiding it. I mean, media companies have always done that. He explicitly chose not to think of himself as a media company, and in so doing, essentially established a precedent that then really has carried across digital media and social media. I think Jack Dorsey was a little different at Twitter, and intermittently, when he had power there, really did try to bring more of an ethical and social frame to his behavior, and he's also a billionaire. Come on, he didn't.
And I remember Jack Dorsey speaking at Techonomy and brought his parents with him.
Yeah, Jack Dorsey is a different kind of person. He's a more thoughtful, more
humane. So Dorsey's
humane.
the anti-Zuckerberg in a sense.
At this point, Jack is sort of hard to figure out at this point with the crypto thing and everything. I think he's changed too, but I think his initial impulses were fundamentally in contrast to Zuckerberg's initial impulses. However, look at the difference. Twitter became a medium-sized, now quasi-failing entity. Facebook became, for many years, was the most profitable company of its size in human history, and is still a profit machine of historic proportions, and he is now the second richest person in the world. So you can't fault him for his business judgment, except that it had these negative social consequences.
David, how much...
It had positive social consequences too. I always like to say that.
How much damage has Facebook done to the world in the last 20 years?
I used to be more confident in analyzing that, but I think what I just said before is the closest I can come to answering that, which is that if you look at the moment we're in, and you see this polarization in society around the world, and most vividly evident in the United States right now, where the two political sides seemingly hate each other and revile anyone who voted for the other candidate. I mean, amazingly, and I find that very distressing. I try to avoid it myself, but it's hard not to. But that whole context, I feel, was facilitated by the rise of social media. Social media was facilitated by the rise of Facebook. Facebook was the company that established the precedent for how social media would be governed, how social media would be used by everybody else. And, you know, because of the sheer size of Facebook and now Meta, its influence just grows and grows. But now we have TikTok, X, plenty of other companies all over the global economy of all different sizes. But in general, those companies have all adopted the same sort of governance ethos that Facebook adopted. So, you know, when I think of it having a fundamentally, but I still would say 50.01%, it's probably a positive impact on the world. You can point to so many good things that happened because of Facebook then and now, and I don't deny that. But but the many, many negative things that have happened as a result of
but
it.
You're a little mealy-mouthed on that. I mean, you know that in your view, I can't say you know, but my sense, David, is you believe that if you were to top this up, the negatives far outweigh the positives.
No, I don't, honestly. I think that because I've done so much reporting on Facebook, I could name many, many, many ways that it has had enormously positive impact. I cannot say that it is fundamentally a negative force on the world. But the way I like to talk about that, I've maybe said this line to you before, you know, just because somebody walks little old ladies across the street, maybe that's a sexist way to think of it, but just because somebody does really great things in the world doesn't mean they shouldn't go to jail if they commit murder. So, you know, people have multiple aspects, and companies have multiple aspects to their presence, their impact, you know, the ratio between virtue and evil is different for everybody and every entity, and there is a lot of harm that has flowed from the way Facebook has operated and its failures to govern information flows across its service. And that led to the rise of autocrats like Duterte and Bolsonaro, Orban, you know, even Modi. You know, there's a good argument that Trump was first elected because of manipulation on Facebook, some of which explicitly was, you know, carried out by Russia. So, you know, there's some negatives. They're real. There's a lot of positives. So I don't say it's fundamentally. I just can't. Even though I say a lot of things should have been done differently. That's not critical. But I'm not being
a lot of blood on the streets. Our mutual friend Maria Ressa, of course.
Yeah, Maria Ressa has suffered tremendously because of Facebook's failures of governance.
And this isn't just
right.
The annoyance or irritation of technology. These are people losing their lives.
People have lost their lives. That's true. But many people have had their lives saved because of Facebook too. You know, this idea of putting communications power in the hands of individuals has a very multifaceted impact.
David, let's get a little bit beyond Facebook because they're not the only company. You've been in the tech space much of your life. You started Techonomy. Looking back over this last 20 years, have you been surprised by the sharp change in the zeitgeist? In 2005, everyone was dramatically optimistic about the potential of technology to change, to reshape the world. These days, the reverse seems to be true. Is that a fair analysis, and do you think there's been a little bit of an overcorrection?
Well, I don't agree with you. I mean, I think you are a little more cynical than me. I still think that technology has enormous opportunity and likelihood of making the world better.
Yeah,
I mean, we're in an AI age. AI is going to have enormous positives to bring.
But let me just come back on that. I wasn't making a judgment myself. I was simply talking about the zeitgeist. There seems to be much more skepticism about technology these days, and certainly there was in 2005.
I think it depends on who you're thinking about. I mean, if you stick to the elite in the United States, yes, there's a lot more skepticism about technology, and a lot of it is driven by a revulsion towards Elon Musk among the liberal intelligentsia. If you look at it on a global scale, I think most people in the world still see technology as making their lives better, and they generally expect that will continue. So, you know, it's all a matter of your framing. It is true that in the United States and in much of Europe, tech has moved to a place where the leaders are skeptical of the motives and impact of tech companies in general. I think that's also, like I say, possibly an error. This is one reason I just wish people would engage with the full breadth of the reality of these companies, which is complex. One cannot, caricature tech companies as black or white. And unfortunately, that's what we tend to caricature everything as black and white now. And again, that's partly because of the impact of social media and tech companies. So these are complex, braided realities, so to speak.
You've also...
I'm frustrating you with my non-cynicism, sir, maybe?
No, not at all. You've also zigged and zagged. You began in 2005 as a journalist focused on technology. You wrote a very successful book about Facebook. You founded Techonomy.
I founded the Brainstorm Conference at Fortune, too, which we haven't talked about. It had very similar.
You've been in the tech business as a leading journalist, writer, thinker, speaker for many years. But you also now, and correct me if I'm wrong, you seem much more interested in the environment than you are in technology. Is that fair?
Well, it's not the environment. I consider climate change.
Well, global warming.
I consider climate change. Are you covering up your mic over there? I think climate change is the world's biggest problem. I think it's getting worse at a rapid pace. I think we have an existential crisis on our hands as the human race. And if we want to continue to have a healthy future, we have no choice but to address it. So for my own sake, I have shifted my focus towards climate and climate tech. I mean, I have this long grounding in technology and a general belief in the potential of tech to bring about positive change in society, and I have shifted that focus to climate tech, which I also think will have enormous positives for society and probably result in remediating a lot of our climate problems faster than most people think. Will it be fast enough to spare the world a disastrous weather era? No, probably not. But will it be soon enough that we might be able to right the ship over time? Yes, probably.
When I think of your career, I'm always reminded of the Fitzgerald, very cliched Fitzgerald quote about in America there are never second chances. You seem to have had many chances, David. You've made them and you remade yourself. What are you most proud of over the last 20 years of your life?
Well, I mean, I've spent 25 years as a writer at Fortune, and that was pretty stable. Then I became an entrepreneur by starting the Brainstorm Conference at Fortune, and I realized I could start things. And that I did have enormous support there. I certainly didn't do it on my own. John Huey helped me, Della Van Heist and Brent Schlender, many people were hugely supportive of that process and deeply involved. But I saw that you could create things. And so that kind of, I think, inspired me to feel, I could write a book. So then I told Zuckerberg I wanted to write a book about him, and he said, go for it. I wrote the book, I got all that access, created that, and then I realized, I had left Fortune in order to write the book. I realized I believed in this idea of convening people, and I wanted to keep making those things happen. And I started the Techonomy Conference from scratch to try to do what we did at Brainstorm, but even better. And I controlled that, started a company to do it, ultimately sold the company and left that company at the end of 22. And I'm very proud of all that. I'm proud particularly of starting Brainstorm, writing the book about Facebook, and starting Techonomy. And all three of those things I think have been quite impactful. I don't think of it as second acts exactly. I see it as much more of a continuity. I even see my focus on climate tech now as more of a continuity with my previous work writing about tech. So, but I have had the willingness and the open-mindedness to shift the context maybe. But I like the way you talk about it. It's very nice.
And of course, perhaps your most remarkable achievement is speaking, I think, more than anyone else at DLD. You've been at 19 of the 20 events.
I don't know if I've spoken more than anybody else.
So where are we in 2024? You've lived through a lot of the booms and busts. The new boom, of course, is AI. Is this just another one? Web 2, social media, the internet? Or is it something different about AI?
not an easy question to answer. There certainly is something different about AI in its multifaceted potential impact, which really, even more than previous technologies, I think literally has the likelihood of changing how we do almost everything, which we're still in a very early phase of. And I find myself as confused by AI as anyone. From a standpoint of the finances of, this frenzy of financing AI companies, 100 million here, 500 million there, $40 billion valuation here, $100 billion valuation there. I mean, I think that's overdone. I think a lot of these internet, like the AI startups and AI features, will not be trillion-dollar entities or even multi-billion-dollar entities. So, but this is the way the internet, the Silicon Valley and investment ecosystem works, is they get carried away by ideas, and that fuels the creation of a new industry, and a lot of people lose money in that process. A lot of people make money in that process. So is it overdone financially? Probably so. Is it overdone in terms of the interest that society is directing towards this change? No.
Finally, David, you've been wonderfully generous, as always, with your time. What's the world going to be like in 20 years' time? We remember 2005. In 2005, the world was in some ways very familiar, and in other ways profoundly foreign. Do you have any sense, I'm not really asking for predictions of the future, but can you imagine what will be familiar about 2045 and what will be foreign? How we will and won't recognize the future?
If you chart out the pace of change that's happened in the last 20 years and assume that that pace of accelerating change will continue, I think it's pretty much impossible to envision what our lives will be like in 2045. I mean, will we still use some form of digital means to enhance our communication? Probably. Will it possibly be, telepathic? Maybe. Will we be living in a dystopian society of climatic and economic breakdown? I don't rule it out. I think there's a real good chance that we can avoid that. Right now, it's easy to be pessimistic, more than it was a month or so ago. This is shortly after the U.S. election. But I really am hard pressed to. I mean, will Google still exist? And will Alphabet, Meta, will these come? I'd say they will still exist. They will still be important. Will OpenAI be the dominant company? I don't know. It's not out of the question. Will xAI, Musk's AI company, be a leading entity? Could very well be. I think right now change is so rampant and so hard to get a bead on, and coming in so many dimensions, that anticipating what 20 years from now are going to be like is really, really tough.
Well, as always, David, you are...
Sorry, I can't be more authoritative.
Well, not just authoritative. You are authoritatively honest. That's why people trust you. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show, particularly in association with our friends at DLD.
I love DLD. So
I will see you in January in Munich, David, and we will continue to do this. Thank you so much.